story. Huawei is a rapidly expanding leader in 5G technology, but it remains dependent on foreign suppliers. It buys about $67 billion worth of components each year, including about $11 billion from U.S. suppliers. But President Donald Trump effectively barred Huawei from the U.S. market in what many believe is part of the ongoing U.S.-China trade war. Local tech analyst Arthur Goldstock happens to be in the U.S. He joins us now from Miami via Skype. Arthur, thanks very much for talking to us. I suppose the first question that anyone would ask is what these restrictions mean to a Huawei phone owner.
It actually means little to existing phone owners, but it's disastrous for Huawei in the long term, but also for the industry as a whole, because it truly disrupts the entire structure of the industry, and it in fact damages the interests of the American companies supplying Huawei. You mentioned how many handsets Huawei supplied last year, 13% of the world's handsets coming from Huawei. You can imagine what amazing that business is for American component suppliers like Qualcomm and Intel, for example, but also for Google, because it really gives them a very powerful foothold across the Huawei devices. And you pull the rug out from under the feet of these suppliers, and you're in fact damaging American interests almost as much as you're damaging Chinese interests. Where it leaves the Huawei user is when they upgrade to their next phone, it's probably not going to be an Android phone unless Huawei find a way to convince the American government to reverse this decision. With luck, we'll see the likes of Google and Intel putting massive pressure on the administration to rescind this decision.
Well, that was exactly my next question, Arthur. I mean, what exactly happens to Google apps, for instance?
So strictly speaking, the next versions of the Huawei phones won't be allowed to have the Android operating system unless they use the open source version and adapt that, and it won't be allowed to have the Google Play Store or the Google apps like Maps and Gmail and the like that we all depend on. So if you suddenly have these phones not able to use the most commonly used productivity apps in the world, then that puts Huawei at a massive disadvantage. They have been developing their own operating system for some years, expecting something like this to happen. They didn't expect a complete ban. They thought that Google would revoke their license for Android, but not for access to their apps. And that's what the government, in effect, is imposing on Google.
So, Arthur, I mean, without being alarmist, the reason I ask those questions is, what can a company like Vodacom or MTN, for instance, do if a consumer had just taken out a hefty contract, we know how expensive these phones are, and wants a refund? Very little a consumer can get out of those mobile giants, can they?
You're not going to need a refund for existing devices because Google has committed itself to supporting the Play Store and security updates on existing devices. They're not affected by this withdrawal of the license. It's all future devices. So in terms of current investment in handsets, it doesn't really affect that. But it does affect the business of MTN and Vodacom in particular if they can't supply Huawei devices, because right now those are the most in-demand devices in South Africa, but across many countries. So we also hope to see governments putting pressure on the U.S. administration to back off from what's becoming a really nasty trade war.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I would like to end off. I mean, where exactly do you see these restrictions coming from if we're going to actually look in the future to this phone's place in the mobile world? Where do you think the restrictions are coming from? It's a very, very debatable and controversial issue.
I think it's very much coming from the trade war between America and China, but also Trump has a pathology around the invasion of Chinese technology. He sees it as a literal war, not just a trade war.
All right, Arthur Gold.